10 keys to unlocking revenue potential. That is how medical device companies can increase revenue through relationships. And we will actually cover more than 10 keys to revenue potential. We'll talk about 10 best practices relative to payer contracting, but we are also going to be opening up the aperture today. And the aperture is relative to sales. That is, as a medical device manufacturer, distributor, DME company, whatever business you may be in, this is all about providing you the maximum number of channels, sales channels, that you can utilize in order to increase revenue for your company. We're going to be talking about not only direct sales relationships, which you most likely have already invoked, but we're going to talk about how you can go about doing a buy and bill, how you can leverage distributor relationships, PBMs, formularies, GPOs, and payer contracts, just to name a few different opportunities that we have relative to enabling new revenue to flow into a device manufacturer, distributor, or DME company. I'd like to take a few moments to introduce my company, HealthSense Inc. My name is Steve Selbst. I'm the co-owner of HealthSense Inc. And we are a company that has been in business for 20 plus years, leading the healthcare contracting and consulting engagements for medical providers of all types and shapes and across the country. And this means that we focus on payer contracting, building relationships with the third parties that we'll be talking about today. And the focus, bottom line, is on enabling companies like yours to increase revenue and profitability. We also work for companies such as Staples.com through their Quill division, doing a variety of general healthcare consulting engagements and providing strategic advice and webinars and a variety of regulation updates and a variety of services related to general healthcare consulting. And most recently, and I want you to be aware of this, we have embarked on a new service that has helped us immensely grow our own business, and we're now providing that service to other companies, and that is the online digital marketing for medical providers. And this is not just your traditional SEO work or social media work, but rather this is enabling our skills as healthcare consultants and our skills in technology to essentially help you to build an online presence and to handle all the content building for you. This means distributing information about your business across the key social media platforms such as Twitter, such as Facebook, such as LinkedIn, and so on. And it also means doing regular blog updates, getting your website not only optimized and built, but enabled so that people on the internet, your customers, your prospects, are going to find you much more easily. So we have put together a very practical set of capabilities beyond what you'll find traditional technology companies do, in that traditional technology companies ask you to pretty much handle the content and they will deploy it. We do both. So this is something that has helped us grow our business dramatically in the last 2 years, and we're now putting it to work for a number of our clients on an ongoing basis, and we're seeing their revenues increase as well. And we'd love to have the opportunity to talk to you about that at a later time. We also handle payer contracts analysis and negotiations. This is how our business started. This is where our core competency emanates from. And we have been very successful now in building relationships with the GPOs, PBMs, formularies, and distributors that we'll be talking about today. We have a product called Revolution Software, which is a cloud-based software product that's designed to analyze and optimize payer contract fee schedules. And we also have a course offering called the Blueprint for Success that has been built into a 4-part, 6-hour series to enable providers to maximize reimbursement and reimbursement techniques in negotiating with health insurance companies. And we have various consulting packages that can be customized and put to work based on your needs. And I mentioned our relationship with Quill Healthcare, which is a part of Staples.com. We also work for many medical associations, including AAOE, AAOS, the American Urological Association, and we have had an ongoing relationship with the Tulane University Medical Center, supporting their large group practice. So for more information about our company, please feel free to go to www.healthsense.com. Now, just to introduce myself and my colleague, Ms. Regina Vasquez. First off, my name is Steve Selbst. I mentioned I'm the CEO and co-owner of HealthSense. I've been involved in the HealthSense business now since about the year 2002 and have personally successfully negotiated many contracts, 5,000 plus, in concert with Ms. Regina Vasquez, who's on the line as well. I also invented and filed patents for the Revolution software product, and in a prior life, I was a business executive with the IBM company and a software development executive, and so we kind of bring together the healthcare background, the technology background, and bring it to work in a way that can help you to grow your business. My colleague and co-owner of HealthSense is Ms. Susan Sharkin. She's not with us on the call today, but as you can see, she is a very well-known individual in the healthcare space. She has her MPH. She ran the outpatient surgery center at UCSF. She's been a director of payer contracting in many different payers, and was interestingly one of the early individuals who did research on the ACO model and actually interviewed Dr. Elliot Fisher, Dr. McClellan, and is quite knowledgeable about the ACO model and how it all works. Ms. Regina Vasquez, who will help me MC today's session, she actually leads our day-to-day client and contract management activities. She has negotiated over 4,000 plus payer contracts, and she has also worked for large health insurance companies building out their network, so she understands both sides of the equation. She's a local leader in her economic development commission and large nonprofit organizations in the in the Denver, Colorado area. And most importantly, she's a terrific client manager, a skilled negotiator, and has been enabling HealthSense clients year after year to increase their revenue and profitability. So that's pretty much who we are. I mentioned we can handle contract negotiations, we can handle building third-party relationships, we can handle your digital marketing needs, and so on. Now, for today's topic, first off, throughout the session in the next hour or so, I will pause for questions, and you can actually ask your questions two different ways. You can send an email through your phone or through your computer at any time beginning right now to the email ID info@healthsense.com as displayed, and we will gather up those questions and Regina will collate them and ask them during break. So if you prefer to use that mechanism, feel free to just fire off your questions that way. Secondly, we will open up the phone lines if you choose to ask a question. You may do so, and we encourage you to do so. Simply press *6 when prompted, and then ask your question. And then when you're done, just to press *6 again. That will help us to mute your line. So 2 ways to ask questions. Send emails to info@healthsense, or I'll remind you that you can also, during the question and answer breaks, simply press *6 on your phone, and it will free up the line for you to ask questions, and we'll go ahead and dialogue with you. And when you're done, you press *6 again. If you lose contact with this webinar at any time during this session, simply go to join.me/healthsense, and your session will be restored instantly. And of course, if you dialed in on the conference line that was provided, if you lose contact with the conference line, simply dial back into that conference line as well. And one of the most popular questions we often get is, how do I get copies of the slides that are presented in these sessions? And I put the URL right here. And also at the end of the session, we will provide the URL again. And if you simply go to that URL at any time following this session, you'll get a complete copy of the slides. And within about 24 hours, we will also have a complete copy of this actual webinar session at that same location. So that's how you go about getting copies. Today's session is all about enabling medical device companies, DME companies, to learn how to go about maximizing revenue opportunities through a number of different third-party organizations. And I talk about this in the context of opening the aperture because I've found over the years and working directly with companies like yours, the most typical sales model is a direct sales model, typically to a provider or hospital system. And many times some of these other opportunities for sales don't end up getting farmed, and therefore you're not maximizing the opportunity to increase revenues. So today it's about opening the aperture, and we'll be talking about PBMs, we'll be talking about formularies, distributors, and GPOs, as well as how to go about leveraging third-party commercial payer agreements where that may be applicable. And we'll kind of lay out a way to think about which channels may be best, depending on the kinds of products that you're going to market with. And we'll also do somewhat of a deep dive on how to navigate the negotiation process when you are negotiating with commercial payers. There are several techniques that are very important to understand. Now, with regard to sources of revenue, it would help me a great deal if you wouldn't mind to take a moment and simply go to www.healthsense.com/Q1med. That's healthsense.com/Q1med, and go ahead and take this quick survey here. Just answer this question, which is, which of the following channels do you derive revenue from? And I've kind of laid out the channels that we're talking about today: payers, PBMs, formularies, GPOs, distributors, i.e. retailers like Quill.com, retailers like Office Depot, retailers like Henry Schein, McKesson, etc., and also providers, and then other. And you can, if you are going to market with more than one of these channels, please check them and use other. If what you're doing is just a straight up direct sales model, then go ahead and click other. But this is an anonymous survey, not keeping track of who's answering the questions or what you're answering. It's just, I think, interesting for a group like this to get a feel for how the group overall is leveraging different sales channels. So again, go to www.healthsense.com/Q1med and please answer this question. You can check as many boxes as you like, and we'll take a look at the results. Okay, so again, go to healthsense.com/Q1med, like you see me pointing to here. I see that we've had at least 2 take the survey. It would be helpful if we get a couple more, so I'll just allow one more moment for that to happen. Again, healthsense.com/Q1med. You can do this from your phone, your tablet computer, your regular computer. All will lead you to the same place. You simply check the boxes, you click done, and you're done. Just like this. Boom. Okay, let's see what we have, and whatever we have, we have. Okay, we have 5 responses. Let's take a look at how these 5 individuals might have answered the question. Okay, so which of the following channels do you derive revenue from? Not surprisingly, other is pretty high because remember I mentioned other we would use to also denote a direct sales force. But interestingly, we have a fairly even distribution, except for payers. A couple of you indicated that you already work with payers. We have 1 individual PBMs, formularies, GPOs, distributors, and providers. So we have kind of an even distribution here with a good portion of the group also leveraging direct sales channels. So thank you for those who participated in that. And for those of you who are not leveraging yet some of these channels, we're going to talk about what they are and also how to go about leveraging these channels. Okay. All right. So sources of revenue. So the sources we're going to talk about, besides the obvious source of having your own direct sales force, is let's talk about payers, PBMs, formularies, GPOs, distributors, and providers. Now, providers is a broad term. Could mean a hospital system, could mean a medical practice, could mean a dental practice, any kind of medical provider. But the context that we want to talk about is buy and bill. And I'll explain a little more about what that means. But the idea is that you sell your product, let's say, to a medical practice, and in turn, the medical practice learns how to leverage the billing to get reimbursement through CPT codes, either through Medicare, Medicaid, or direct payers, by utilizing the appropriate CPT code or HCPCS code in turn to get reimbursed for your product or service. So they end up making a capital purchase, and then they end up essentially getting reimbursed as they provide services. And that's really critical, is to make that linkage with a provider so that they can in turn obtain the appropriate reimbursement to derive benefit from utilizing your product and service. Now, what are payers? Let's make sure we kind of level set here. Payers can be commercial health insurance carriers, companies like UHC, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, Aetna, HealthNet, etc., just to name a few. These are companies that underwrite health insurance plan for beneficiaries and for companies. And then there's also self-insured employer groups, and these are large companies, companies like IBM, for example, who basically self-insure but subcontract the administration of their benefits program to a third party, one of the large third-party commercial payers. So these kinds of plans, have really many of the same characteristics that a direct plan would have for a beneficiary, except the company itself is underwriting the plan. So that's what we mean by payers, either health insurance carriers or self-insured employer groups. Now, what is a PBM? A pharmacy benefit manager. Now, these are the familiar pharmacies that we see driving by on our local boulevard here, CVS Caremark, Medco, Express Scripts, to name a few. And this is essentially a company that is managing the pharmacy benefit program for the employer group that we just talked about, or for the health plan that we just talked about. So typically the health plans will subcontract the pharmacy benefit portion of the plan to a company like a CVS Caremark, a Medco, an Express Scripts, and so on. And therefore they will pay and process pharmacy claims, but they also manage and maintain formularies. So what are formularies? Now, formularies are lists of drugs or products that can be products like your products potentially that will be on the formulary or reimbursed by the payer's benefit plan. And this is really critical because when you talk about a channel and leveraging potentially the PBM as a go-to-market channel, one of the keys to success is to get in the formulary of the PBM. And so what are the different kinds of formularies? So we'll talk about types and tiers. So you have open formularies on one end of the spectrum, and you have closed formularies on the other. An open formulary is essentially the least restrictive in that it lists all or most drugs, and it provides rankings based on preferred status. On the other side of the equation are the closed formularies that are very restrictive. They have a limited list, and they may allow for reimbursement for a non-formulary or out-of-network scenario, but with much higher co-payments. And then you kind of have this middle tier, the managed formulary, where it has they're similar to open formularies, but they're using incentives to encourage the use of the preferred products that are in the formulary. And they're typically, somewhat higher co-payments as well for the non-preferred products, much like you would see in the closed formulary. So the point is that the formulary, bottom line, is a list of preferred drugs or products that can be dispensed by the PBM. And if you have a product that fits a go-to-market through a PBM, it's a terrific mechanism to use to generate business. Now, formulary tiers, we have 3 tiers: generics, then brand name with unique clinical value, and brand names in tier 3. Now, of course, generics tend to be the lowest in terms of co-payment. Then you get to this middle tier where brand names may be allowed with unique clinical value, still have relatively low co-payments. On the other hand, if you use just brand names, typically in most formularies, they will tend to carry higher co-payments. So keep in mind that there's also tiering when it comes to formularies. So formularies, represent a great opportunity to leverage the PBM's list of products that it can recommend and sell. And then we have GPOs, or group purchasing organizations. Now these are really pervasive opportunities to consider. And what a group purchasing organization is, it's an organization that's kind of like I view it as a Costco that doesn't carry products when it comes to the way that it serves its members. Just like if you've used Costco and you buy an annual membership for $125, $150 or whatever, then you're able to go visit a Costco and leverage all the discounts for the products on the shelf. Well, the GPO is very much like that. It tends to have, in the case of a healthcare GPO, it has a participation of membership among healthcare providers of all types and shapes and sizes. And the idea is that the providers may pay a small fee, or depending on the scenario, no fee, to belong to the GPO. And the GPO then builds relationships with the various suppliers or vendors, companies like yours, to provide products to its members at a discount. And the key here is that the purchasing power is such that there can be tens of thousands, or even in some of the cases of these large companies like Novation, Amerinet, Premier, and Med Assets, it could be tens of thousands of members or potential customers that could have interest in buying your products at a discount. And the funding is either by membership fee, kind of like Costco could be a small membership fee provided by the members. And typically there's about a 3 to 5% fee, often for the vendors to participate as well and to agree to sell their products at a discount. Where this differs, if you will, from a retail, Costco model, is they don't have a big warehouse like an Amazon or Costco where they stock products, but rather they build contracts with the vendors who then will ship product directly. Often there is a website tied into the GPO where the products can be ordered, but they usually will not stock any products. In fact, I'm not sure I know of any models where GPO puts products on their shelves, but this is what it looks like. And if you imagine yourselves out here to the right, here you are as a DME company, a device manufacturer, device distributor. So essentially you build a contract with the GPO, who can now in turn sell your products back to the providers who are members of the GPO. And the members may or may not pay membership dues to the GPO. And depending on whether they're actually member owners or just participants, they may participate in the retained earnings and get some form of dividend payment based on the profitability of the GPO. But the point is, you have the providers out here, you have yourselves to the right, and the idea is that you're providing products at a discount and servicing the providers. And it's a great channel because you basically are connecting yourself into tens of thousands of customers potentially by participating in a GPO that is likely to drive sales of your products. And that's really the context that I want you to think about a GPO is, does it make sense for you to participate in the GPO, offer your products at a discount, and get access to the many opportunities to sell to the healthcare providers that are members of the GPO. Then there's yet another kind of a channel. And today we have companies, for instance, like Staples.com that have entire divisions, retailers that have divisions like Quill Healthcare is a division of Staples.com. And all they do is they focus on building and selling a value proposition and expertise to medical practices, chiropractors, dental practices, eye care centers, and the like. And the idea is that they are specialized sales channels selling everything from medical supply products and office supply products to fulfill all of the purchasing needs of their customers, which are typically medical practices, dental practices, and other kinds of practices. So to the extent that your products might be sold through a retail channel, it would be a great opportunity to think about how do you get connected to a Quill Healthcare, how do you get in their catalog, how do you get in a McKesson catalog, a Henry Schein. These are terrific retail models. They're appropriate, typically for a product that is somewhat of a, higher volume, lower cost kind of a scenario, depending on, maybe you have testing equipment or something of that nature. A monitoring device might be very appropriate to consider a retail channel in addition to some of these other channels. Now, why does all of this matter to you? Well, it's because at the end of the day, you're selling products into two different kinds of target markets, either providers or to patients directly. And then, depending on who you're selling to, the opportunity is there to leverage these channels to get your products fulfilled in a manner that's going to meet the needs of your target markets and is going to be sourced through one of the mechanisms that your target market buys products from. Now, even if you're selling your products directly, as I indicate with this arrow, through a buy and bill scenario, for example, to medical providers, you're still going to want to go that extra step and teach your providers how to go about getting reimbursed through them providing services to their patients so that they can get reimbursed ultimately for utilizing your products as part of the deployment of their services. For example, if you were selling a heart monitoring device to a cardiologist, you would want to teach that cardiologist which of his or her codes they might be able to use in order to bill out for their services that would utilize that monitor. So that's the kind of thing that you want to be cognizant of. Based on where we're at in this discussion, Regina, I think we're also getting close to the halfway point. I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor to questions. And let me remind, first off, Regina, if you could please press asterisk 43 on your phone.
The conference is now in question and answer mode.
Okay, and now for those individuals that would like to ask a question, again, I remind you that you can send your questions if you haven't done so already to info@healthsense.com, or you can simply right now press asterisk 6 on your phone and go ahead and ask your question. So again, asterisk 6, and please ask any questions. Are there any live questions? Okay, then let me turn the floor over to Regina. And Regina, do we have any questions that have come in to info@healthsense.com?
Yes, we have a question. What is the best way to determine which channel would be most effective?
That's a terrific question. So how do we sort our way through this maze? Well, the first thing is think about who you're selling to. Always start with, are you selling to providers, or are you selling to patients, or do you have a product where you might actually target both? Also look at the expense associated with your product. So if it's a high ticket item, for example, it may be that that your device reduces hospital readmissions substantially. Well, but it's expensive. Well, if that's the case, it may be very desirable for you to go to a payer and contract, because there's a mutually beneficial value proposition. The payer potentially can keep patients out of the hospital or reduce their hospital stays by utilizing your equipment, and to the extent that you can show some metrics demonstrating that value, there's very likely a scenario where the payers would want to reimburse you for your products and services, because in turn it is helping them improve care, which means that they're effectively reducing cost. So that's one factor. You also want to look at, as we talked about with PBMs and formularies, is your product something that, for example, might be applicable to a retail model? And would it make sense, therefore, to consider some combination of GPOs, distributors, PBMs, and formularies to in turn drive volume sales for your products and to open up the size of the target market that you're selling to? The other scenario is, is this a product or device that is going to require a large capital outlay? And if it's going to require a large capital outlay, it may be appropriate to do a buy and bill scenario and target a subset of medical practices, for example, in order to sell your product to help that medical practice in turn provide its services at a lower price point, and in turn get reimbursed through the fee-for-service CMS Medicare CPT code, or through the payer's reimbursement. So I think, depending on the price point of the product, depending on the degree to which you can leverage volume sales versus it's a higher price ticket item and it requires a direct sales model, will help you to determine which combination of these channels makes the most sense for you to leverage. Okay. Other questions,
question?
Regina?
Yeah, one more question. When you're a part of a GPO, can you sell all of your products to any of the members?
Well, that's a good question too. And typically, you do need to go through an application process with the GPO for each of the products that you intend to include as part of the GPO, because each product is going to have a unique contract. So even if the GPO has some uniformity, you're still going to need a contract that governs the discounts that you're going to sell your products for to members of the GPO, and also whether or not the GPO requires that 3 to 5% fee in order to be a vendor and be certified to sell through that GPO. Okay. Any others at this stage, Regina?
Okay, that's it.
Okay,
That's
great. Then go ahead, Regina, please, and press asterisk 41 on your line right now to mute the lines once again.
The conference is now in presentation mode.
Okay. Now, again, talking about buy and bill, meaning that you are selling your products to a provider and they in turn bill out. So how might this work? The first thing you want to do is identify the CPT codes that are billed by your clients, in this case by the medical provider, and try to find a specific CPT code that is actually assigned to the device or product that you're selling versus, A9999 catch-all codes. Because what we have found, we work for a number of large device monitoring companies, for example, and it gets really difficult when you go back and try to retrospectively collect on claims if you're using a generic code that isn't plumbed into the health insurance company's billing system. It can be oftentimes hard to go about and actually collect the reimbursement for your code. So it really is important to upfront figure out which codes that your products are applicable to, so that when you in turn sell your products to that provider, you can instruct the provider how to go about getting reimbursed and give them some idea, per service, what they can expect to obtain, and that will give them some idea about how quickly they can recoup the capital cost investment that it takes to buy a useful product like the one that you're selling. Similarly, you need to determine whether CMS Medicare provides for CPT codes to be reimbursed for the products that you offer. Typically, there's parallel construction relative to the codes that are reimbursed by Medicare and by payers, but over time they can diverge, where Medicare might make a change to a code. Think about the recent case where they changed the CPT codes for consult codes versus office visit codes, and yet you still have payers that still have some of these consultation codes that are in their systems that are now inconsistent with CMS Medicare. And similarly, there have been cases where high-priced testing equipment, the codes have changed and might be inconsistent between Medicare as well as commercial payers. So it's not 100% parallel construction, but you want to make sure that in both cases, you know which codes currently are carried in the payer system or in the Medicare system so that you can appropriately describe to the provider that you're selling to how they go about getting reimbursed for your services and how much they can expect to get reimbursed based on the delivery of those services to their patients. And you also want to build a contracting strategy so that you can help your providers. This is a contracting strategy in this case potentially for your providers now to go about getting maximum reimbursement for the CPT codes that are relevant to the products that you are selling them. And now we're going to talk a little bit about when you engage with a direct payer, a commercial payer, how you can go about leveraging success with the commercial payer, and talk about some of the best practices to utilize to go about getting maximum contract reimbursement. First off, one of the things that you want to do is take a look at your current direct sales structure and see if you can map your go-to-market strategy. First and foremost, prioritize the states where you already have a sales presence, and it may be required, depending on the scenario, that you also open up some sort of a location in that state. Certain commercial payers in some states, this is definitely not uniform, but there are states that will require that you do have a presence. And so, if you're going to make that investment, you want it to be in an area where you can also supplement the payers network and do some direct selling and marketing to customers in that geography. So, getting that map straight and the priorities of which states to contract with which payers makes the most sense. And there are also cases where, depending on your product or service, where the payer may have, for instance, an ancillary network that might be applicable to DME products, and for that reason, the payer may subcontract to a third-party organization, like an Optum, for example, to actually administer their payer contracts for DME products. And some may do a national contract. Many times the payers will require that you individually contract state by state. So the first thing and the foremost thing to do is to map out your strategy for selling by state, and then you can start to layer into which payers then have the biggest presence in the state, which often we can do by checking in with the Department of Insurance. And there's usually a couple of large players in any event that are pervasive when it comes to commercial payers in certain states, and you want to start off and obviously go after the big fish, get contracted, and map it to your sales force. Then you want to go about determining whether or not the payer has unique CPT codes designed to bill for your products or services. We talked about avoiding the use of generic CPT codes, where it's going to make it very hard for you to go back later on and demonstrate that your product or service needs to be reimbursed. And if you can't really find a unique CPT code, then I would suggest strongly that you look at writing into the payer contract a unique clause that indicates that you can bill a certain way, like using a generic CPT code at a certain rate, so that there's no question later on when you go to make sure that you get paid correctly on a claim, that you can point back to a provision in your payer contract that suggests that you get paid for that generic code for your particular product or service. And you also want to talk about key patients or key cases that have arisen in the location that you're trying to put a local contract. Maybe there was a case, you have a heart monitoring device, and there have been 3 patients that you have provided your product to that have really facilitated the care of patients that belong to, payer A's network. And as a result, you can use that as leverage or reason for being in the payer's network. Now, the payer may say, well, gee, that's just a few isolated cases. Why do we want to, have a complete agreement? And that would still give you an opportunity then perhaps on the patients that you are treating to say, okay, why don't we start off and do a letter of agreement so that we can provide care to your patients that need it the most and create a win-win scenario where we, can enable them to use our product to reduce their chance of, getting incurring a long stay in a hospital unnecessarily. So let's go ahead and put a letter of agreement in place. So these are the kinds of value propositions that you want to look at. How can you save the payer money? How can you make money? How can you treat a patient better? That's the three-legged stool that we want to shoot for. And make sure that if you have additional services that are not related to your product, maybe you have to instruct the patient how to use your product. Maybe it's not as simple as you hand it over to the patient and they use it. Maybe you have to, on a weekly basis, meet with the patient, make some adjustments, do some monitoring. Well, make sure that you're accounting for those costs, either in the code that you're getting reimbursed for, or have some provision where you get a rate on a per case basis or whatever is needed in order to cover the additional services. And where possible, if there is data available, if you can do benchmarking to determine either relative to Medicare, Medicaid, or some other common benchmark, what is typically paid for the codes that carry your service, that can go a long way to helping you negotiate appropriate rates. So when you go about putting payer contracts in place, there are 10 best practices, but it's a lot easier to remember 3 things than 10 things. So we'd like to talk about the 10 best practices boiling down to get yourself prepared. That is, doing the appropriate analysis like we talked about relative to your products and making sure that you map them to the right place, that you understand what the value proposition is to the payer, that you understand how physicians go about getting reimbursed, that you put all the pieces together so that you can actually demonstrate value to the payer, to the patient, to the provider for you being in a payer's network. Then you go about negotiating and iterating, and hopefully it doesn't become too much of an arm wrestle and you can create that handshake because you're bringing a valuable product to market that is going to save the payer money, improve patient care, and make you a buck as well, and that's all good. And then when you're done, don't forget to monitor, no pun intended, monitor your contract to be sure that you're being paid correctly, because typically the payer will pay the lesser of the bill charge or the contracted rate. So you want to make sure your charge master is set high enough, and then you want to make sure that after the contract's in place, that indeed the payments are flowing at 100% of the contracted rate, including patient coinsurance and co-payments. So these 3 phases essentially boil down to 10 steps. The 10 steps break into the preparation, which is the analysis, and then putting together a high-impact proposal letter and making contact with the payer, and then iterating that negotiation until you can come to agreement. And if you can't come to agreement, what do? You can typically escalate to senior management and make your case. If you can't get to conclusion that way, consider your out-of-network options. And if it may be better for you to be out of network and essentially get the patient to pay a higher portion because you can't come to terms with the payer, then that's an option. And then once you have the agreement in place, you do monitoring, and then once the cycle is complete, if it's an evergreen once-a-year renewal with 90-day prior to the anniversary date renewal, then probably 6 months ahead, 6 months into the contract each year, you're going to want to negotiate the rates for the next year, preferably in this environment. If you can do a 3-year lock with cost of living increases and performance bonuses, that would be better. And basically, get this whole cycle in place and handled. Now, when you do preparation, what you want to look at here is, does Medicare reimburse for your codes? Chances are, if Medicare does, you've got a much better shot at a commercial payer, because commercial payers typically will model most of their fee schedules in parallel to a Medicare reimbursement fee schedule. You're going to want to do a SWOT analysis for your business and products, which means that you're going to want to compare the value proposition that you bring to the table in a way that is going to be compelling for the commercial payers. So what does that mean? It means that payers are insurance companies. Insurance companies are rewarded by essentially maximizing profitability. And by maximizing profitability, that means that if they can find ways of providing products and services that are efficient, that reduce cost, then it's going to be interesting. So you want to think about what is unique about your particular product or service that is going to save costs. Is it going to reduce steps in some sort of sequential testing? Maybe it's simple as it's one sort of blood test instead of 6 unique tests that are required. Maybe it's a monitoring device that reduces inpatient stays. Whatever the scenario is. Maybe it's a CPAP device that has very high compliance rates. All kinds of scenarios can emanate here that result in wins. And then once you have scoped out that value proposition, you turn it into a proposal letter that's short, to the point, and explains why it's valuable to have you in the payer's network. And one of the things I encourage you to think about is that the time dedicated to negotiations, actually only about 40% of it, or 30% if you just look at the pure negotiation, goes into negotiation, 10% into monitoring, but 60% is all about doing that preparation to understand the whole mapping of your value proposition, how it relates to Medicare reimbursement that's already in place, figuring out what to ask for based on a standard fee schedule and need, and so forth. So in the SWOT analysis, again, think about your strengths as a practice, your opportunity to go to market and do cross-selling. Who is your competition, and how much is that going to affect pricing? There are some cases where product is somewhat commoditized, and in order to get into a market, you might have to consider a reduced pricing scenario to get into a particular network. And are there threats? Are there other technologies emerging, for example, that might eventually obsolete? So you really want to do that SWOT analysis before you build that proposal letter. And then once you're ready to build a proposal letter, you talk about your market position, you talk about your utilization, your operational advantages, and then you try to close the sale. And then you negotiate where basically you want to put the payer on a timetable where you ask the payer typically to get back, within a 3 to 5 week period of the time that you send out a proposal letter. You immediately start following up within a few days of the time that you send out the letter. And then where needed, you want to escalate. One of the things that I would suggest to you that you consider right from the beginning is don't escalate right up front. Don't ask to talk to the director of provider contracting or the VP of contracting before you have started to work your way through the contracts manager, because typically what will happen is if you start at the executive levels, the very first thing that they will do, and any good executive would do, is push you back to the people that are responsible for putting contracts in place, which now means that if you get shut down by the very people that you're negotiating with, you have taken away your own negotiating power, because now you can't escalate because you've already been there and you've been sent back down. So that's one of the most common mistakes that we have seen in payer contract negotiations, is folks getting a bit antsy about getting the agreements in place and wanting to start at the top. I don't advise that as a protocol. It's better to keep that in your kit bag if the negotiation doesn't start to pan out in a way that makes sense for you. And then, look for ways to optimize payers' offers. If you have a broad portfolio of products or services, it may be, reducing reimbursement on certain portions of your portfolio, maximizing it on others based on the rates that you charge for your products or services and the volume performed. Everything really should be looked at as the multiplication of the two, because the multiplication of the rate times the volume is what determines your revenue, and you want to keep priority on products or services that produce the most revenue. And then also take a look at contract language to make sure that things like the claims payment terms are such that you get paid within a reasonable period of time, 90 days or less, that you have a reasonable period of time to file claims, that that you understand the lesser bill charge versus the contracted rate, the term and termination clauses. Is it, ideally you want a 90-day term without cause, but I would say certainly no more than 90 days prior to the anniversary date. So all of these sort of operational constructs can be looked at when it comes to a payer agreement, and they will affect ultimately your reimbursement. And then monitoring, what you want to do is on a periodic basis, about once a month, pull the EOBs, the explanation of benefits, the claims for your top 5 to 10 codes. If you only have a few codes, then that's great. And you can compare the contracted rates against the actual payments so that you can detect whether or not there's under reimbursement. And then don't forget to note exactly when the anniversary date is of the agreement so that you can get ahead of the time that is needed in order to renegotiate. So if you have for instance, a 90-day prior to the anniversary date renegotiation term, then you're going to want to start at about 6 months prior to the anniversary date to give at least a few months time for negotiation, for renegotiation of the agreement. Okay. Now, one of the things that I'll point out is when you monitor claims, what you want to do, this is just a sample from a particular practice, but if you imagine these are codes that carry your products or services, what you want to do is take a look at the amount of reimbursement that is being provided by the primary payer, which can, in this case, can be your contracted rate. And then you want to compare it to the claims rate. And if a claims rate is coming in less than the contracted rate, and you multiply by the frequency that the procedure is performed, then you can detect the amount of under reimbursement. You should, when you do this sort of monitoring, and this comes out of a HealthSense Revolution software example where we, automatically can stack up 2 agreements or 2 fee schedules and compare on a common volume base of one or the other of the fee schedules. Well, if you're getting paid at the contracted rate, you should find that your claims rate, in effect, is the same as your contracted rate, and therefore, when you multiply and compare, the delta should be 0. Well, if it's not 0 and you're under reimbursed, those are the items you want to flag, and then you want to dig deeper to determine why you were under reimbursed. Was it because you set your charge master too low and unfortunately you were getting paid the lesser your bill charge versus a contracted rate, or was there a good reason for it, or not? I mean, was it that the payer just inadvertently underpaid you and now you need to go back per the retrospective review in your contract and claim that underpayment? And be very careful of that, because you only have 90 days to do a retrospective review and you wait 120 days to do this assessment and you find that you're under reimbursed, it may be too late to get the money back. So anyway, very important to monitor those claims. Contract language. We talked about term and termination. Ideally should be 90 days without cause. Timely submission. Ideally, you want to have at least 90 days to submit claims and 30 to 45 days to get payments. You want retrospective review of overpayments to be 90 days maximum. I've seen really ugly scenarios with DME companies actually where 2 years after a contract was put in place, the payer did an audit, found that 2 years ago they overpaid by $1 million, and they came back to that DME company and asked for $1 million. Well, if there's not a limitation on the retrospective review of the overpayments, the payer may in fact have the right to come back and collect. So make sure there's some reasonable limit when it comes to retrospective review of overpayments to you as a practice, or you could end up with a large expense, an unexpected expense that could be devastating to your business years later. We talked about lesser bill charge versus contracted rate. The rule of thumb is that your two things. Your bill charge should be always above all of your contracted rates. And the second thing is that if there is a corresponding Medicare payment that carries the codes for your products or services, you want to make sure that they're set at roughly 250 to 300% or more of Medicare rates as well. Based on your write-offs, you're going to want to consult your CPA in that context as well. But typically, 250 to 300% is in the range. And favored nation, you don't want any favored nations. That means that if there is another payer that puts a contract in place at lower rates than the payer that you're with, now you're obligated to reduce the fee schedule for your current payer. Not a good scenario. You don't see this too much in modern times, but it used to be a fairly common clause 5 years plus back. So I'd like to put it in here so that you at least know that it can rear its ugly head potentially, and you don't want to ever see any language that suggests that you're going to reduce rates based on another favored payer giving you lower rates, that type of thing. And if there are major changes to a contract, maybe they change your fee schedule unexpectedly, then that should trigger an option to terminate if you choose not to live with that lower fee schedule. And of course, having your legal counsel review all your contracts is very critical. So again, preparation, negotiation, monitoring, and renegotiation. Those are the key steps, the 10 best practices when it comes to payers. Regina, let me just pause for one or two questions before we do a wrap-up and a summary. Are there any more questions at this time? Why don't you go ahead and press asterisk 43.
The conference is now in question and answer mode.
Okay, if anyone has a question, please press asterisk 6 at this time on your phone and ask your question. Okay, did we get any through info@HealthSense?
I do have one question. Do you have any tips for dealing with payers who tell you the network is closed?
Closed networks. Well, a couple of ways to deal with closed networks. First, I would wait to get that answer at the first level negotiator. I wouldn't usurp the process and go higher up in the organization. Wait to get that at the lowest level in the organization, and use that as an opportunity then to escalate, hopefully with the support of the lower level contracts negotiator, so that you can demonstrate the value of your product or service to the payer and why they should have you in the network. Now, it may be that it's business value. There's something unique about the product or service that you're providing that the payer needs to know about that might not fit their standard rules about closed networks. Or it could be that, maybe to get in the network, you consider a lower price point to make it more attractive for the payer to get you into a more commoditized scenario. But I think the general guideline would be to work your way through the negotiation process, let that closed network scenario happen, and then at that point escalate it and present your business value, hopefully unique value compared to other products or services that the payer already has. And if not, then that's the point at which, if you can't compete on unique value, you might need to compete on price. Do you have any other tips on that, Regina?
Yes, you can also leverage your referral networks. If you have large employer groups that you work with, or large physician practices who utilize your products and services, they might be helpful in lobbying the payer to allow you into the network or make an exception if they've got a closed network.
Yeah, excellent. So, if you've already been selling to providers and they are referenceable and they're already in the payer's network, that certainly is a good leverage point as well. So, excellent point. Okay, so now we're a couple minutes from the top of the hour. Let me do a couple things to wrap up here. First, why is all this important? You want to gain advantage on your competition, and most importantly, you want to make more money. And how do you make more money? You leverage all of the different channels that we talked about here. We spent a bit of extra time on the payer scenario because it's somewhat specialized, But again, don't forget about your GPOs, your distributors, your PBMs, and your formulary that goes along with the PBM. So consider the channels, go after your opportunities, pick the right path through these channels, and we can certainly help you to do that if you'd like some help navigating your opportunity to go beyond your direct sales channel. And wanted to just invite all of you who participated, if you'd like to take advantage of a free half-hour consult. My partner, Susan Chargan, would be happy to meet with you, understand your business, your current sales channels, who your competition is, how you go about dealing with issues you might have, such as collections. And she will, in a very short time, be able to at least give you a few tips in a half-hour kind of a session about how you can increase your revenues. There is no cost or obligation for doing this. It's actually a benefit that we have for those that attend these sessions. So feel free to contact her directly at that email or phone number to partake in that session. I highly recommend it because that half hour can end up helping you to make a lot more money. As far as contacting us, reach out to me or Susan. Regina, by the way, is rvasquez@healthsense.com as well. You can go to our website, www.healthsense.com. We have some excellent articles written about contracting, about GPOs and so forth, if you just take a look at that. And again, if you would like copies of these charts, just go to this URL here, healthsense.com/copy-of-10-keys/ and we will have the complete webinar recording within 48 hours. And actually, we already have the copy of the charts from this particular session already at that URL, so you can request them at any time. So I want to thank all of you who participated today for coming to the session, and I trust that we were able to give you a few tips that will help you to grow your business. And I'd love the opportunity to work with you in the future as well. So thank you for your participation, and this officially ends today's webinar.